Thank you for watching. This is Edward Finch, and these are my opinions. Welcome back. This week I'm going to prove to you that the 2020 election did not and could not have had massive fraud. You know, the amount of fraud it would take to sway an election. Was there absolutely no fraud at all? No. But there's been fraud in all 58 prior presidential elections too, but never to the point that it would sway the election. What I'm going to prove to you now is how insane it is to believe that there was fraud in the 2020 election to the point that it would have overturned the results of the election. Now, full disclosure here, I'm going to mutter the four-letter F word a few times in this video. And I know some of you take offense to that four-letter word. That four-letter word being fact. So while you may take offense to it, I need to use it to prove my point in this video. Let's start with a little history to put things in context. If we look back at the 2016 election, you know, the one that Trump said he trounced Clinton in, he received 306 Electoral College votes, which admittedly is pretty good. Looking closely at the results, Clinton lost because she lost in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If she had won those three states, she would have won. But the fact is, she didn't. She lost Michigan by 10,704 votes. She lost Wisconsin by 22,748 votes. And she lost Pennsylvania by 44,292 votes. Or, the three states combined, 77,744 votes. So, while Trump received 36 more Electoral College votes than he needed, he did so by a total of 77,744 votes spread over three states. Of course, there were some recounts because the election was so close. However, the day after the election, Hillary Clinton seceded to Donald Trump and wished him luck. From that day forward, there was some grumbling among the people, but there was no talk of fraud. Now let's jump ahead to the 2020 election. In a very similar fashion, Joe Biden won the election because of Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. If Trump had won those three states, he would have won, and he'd be president now. However, the fact is he didn't. Again, in the 2020 election, the numbers were really close. Trump lost Georgia by 11,779 votes. He lost Wisconsin by 20,682 votes. And he lost Pennsylvania by 80,555 votes, or a total of 113,016 votes. We are still waiting for Trump to concede the election to Biden, something that every president has done in the past 231 years. Instead, he keeps saying that the election was a fraud, and he even assembled a group of people to try to stop the count of the Electoral College votes so that he could stay in the White House. To prove there was fraud, a few simple things would need to be explained. Because these things can't be explained, it proves that there was no mass fraud. In this example, I'm making the assumption that the votes in all of the three states I'm going to cover was a tie, and that Trump is saying that fraud took place to let Biden win. For fraud to take place, first of all, there needs to be physical ballots that can be filled out fraudulently. Second of all, you would need to know what states to focus on prior to the end of the election day. Third, you would need to know before the polls closed which voters didn't vote in those states. And finally, you would need some kind of communications between the people that are committing the fraud that nobody knows about, and you would have to hope that anybody who committed the fraud never went public or never leaked the information. So let's take a look at one thing at a time. First, let's take a look at the number of ballots that would have been needed to complete the fraud. In Pennsylvania, that's 80,555 ballots, or a stack of paper about 27 feet tall. And remember, you would need to know who didn't vote that day. There weren't a lot of people saying that they went to the polls only to find out that somebody had voted in their place. Next, the ballots would need to be filled out, folded, placed in the inside envelope, placed in the outside envelope, and then a forged signature would need to be added. So let's say this takes a minute per ballot. At a minute per ballot, that would be 1,342.6 man-hours to complete that task just for Pennsylvania. Knowing that time was critical and that these ballots needed to get to the counting location as soon as possible, it would take about 1,400 people to do that task. So assuming a way was figured out to produce all these ballots, next you have the problem of how do you get them to the counting location. You would have had to fill out the ballots after the polls were closed so you know who voted. And at that point, all the collection boxes were already emptied. You can't just walk in off the street with a pile of papers, which now has grown to 162 feet because they're in an envelope. You can't just walk in off the street with a stack 162 feet tall of ballots and say, here, count these. You can't bring them to the post office because the post office is already closed at that point. And the post office is going to raise an eyebrow if you walk in with 80,555 ballots and say, here, mail these. So I really don't see how it would be physically possible to fraudulently create 80,555 ballots from the time the poll closed to the time that all the votes were counted. It's just not physically possible. Not only that, but this would also have to be taking place at 2 other states with communications involved, and yet there was absolutely no leaks. Nobody came forward and said, hey, I was at somebody's house and we created all these ballots. So where did they all come from? It's not like there'd be a 27-foot stack of empty ballots just sitting around somewhere to start with. And then there's no way that they can get them to the counting place if they had filled them out. So it's not physically possible that the election was a fraud. It's much more possible that the election was just like every other election for the past 59 elections. Now, like I said in the beginning, I know it's a terrible 4-letter word, but the fact is there was no way for there to be fraud in the 2020 election. At least fraud that would throw the election to Donald Trump. He lost. Joe Biden won the election. So let's do a quick review. There was nothing different about the 2020 election that would make it more fraudulent than the other 58 elections that took place prior to it. There were other close elections. As a matter of fact, the one 4 years earlier where Trump won was even closer. It was not possible to create the number of ballots that would have been needed to throw the election. And finally, both parties were in the counting room at all times, as always. That's how elections are run. Once again, I want to thank you for watching my video, and please don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button below. Thank you, and have a great day.